Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're tuning in, you already know the digital landscape is, well, it's a minefield. But did you know that organizations are losing billions of dollars every single year, not just because of some genius super hackers, but actually due to incredibly poor cyber governance from the inside? It's true. Dealing with these threats isn't just a technical IT problem anymore. It's a fundamental leadership mandate. So today, we're going to demystify the core theories behind cybersecurity governance. We're going to take what usually feels like this overwhelmingly complex, highly technical issue and transform it into a clear, structured, and completely actionable managerial masterclass. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. For decades, the media, and honestly, even corporate boardrooms, have painted this picture of cybersecurity. You know the one. A dark room, hackers in hoodies typing furiously, and the only way to stop them is this massive, complex wall of firewalls, encryption, and anti-malware software. We really need to completely debunk that outdated myth right now. If you're looking at security as just an IT shopping list, like, hey, let's just buy the absolute shiniest new software or the most expensive firewall we can find, you've literally already lost the battle before it's even begun. So what is it then? Well, cybersecurity is actually a fundamental managerial discipline, and it's incredibly important to wrap your head around the fact that it is absolutely not about achieving 100% safety. Because zero risk, that simply doesn't exist. Think about it like driving a car. We accept the inherent risk of driving every day because, hey, we need to get to work. But we put on our seatbelts, we follow traffic laws to manage that risk. We don't just leave the car parked safely in the garage forever, right? In the business world, cybersecurity is the seatbelt. It's a set of governance actions, the policies, the risk management processes we use to protect our information. Ultimately, security is just defined as the absence of unacceptable risk. The whole point is to keep the organization operating securely enough so it can actually fulfill its mission and drive growth. To get us there, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to take this massive, intimidating topic and break it down into 5 logical, totally digestible building blocks. 1. Redefining cybersecurity basics. 2. Classifying your data. 3. The fraud and risk triangles. 4. Treating cyber risks. And finally, number 5, achieving cybersecurity maturity. All right, let's start with Chapter 1, Redefining Cybersecurity Basics, and we're specifically focusing on protecting business value. Before we can even begin to manage risk, I really want you to think about what your organization is actually trying to protect, because it's not just physical servers, laptops, and hard drives. It's the core value of your entire business. And that brings us to the famous rule of 3 in this space, the CIA Triad. This is great because it brilliantly translates highly technical outcomes into very clear managerial objectives. First up, we've got confidentiality. This is all about keeping your sensitive information out of the wrong hands. I mean, imagine the absolute devastation if your top-tier client list was leaked directly to your biggest competitor. Nightmare, right? Second is integrity. This means ensuring your data remains accurate and trustworthy. Think about it. If a hacker subtly alters your bank routing numbers by literally just 1 digit, your financial decisions completely degrade, and you wouldn't even realize it until the money is totally gone. And third, availability. Making sure your systems and data are accessible exactly when your team actually needs them. If a ransomware attack completely halts a hospital's patient intake system, well, that's not just a technical glitch. That is a massive, life-threatening availability failure. Moving right along into Chapter 2, Classifying Your Data, and the crucial concept of proportionate protection. Look, because we are always managing risk within finite budgets, we have to realize right out of the gate that not all information holds the exact same value to the organization. I mean, you wouldn't spend $1 million to protect a public press release, would you? Of course not. Data classification is this structured progression that translates a business's legal obligations and its potential harms into proportionate protection. Let's say you're launching a revolutionary new product. Your marketing brochure? That sits at public. There's zero harm if it's released. In fact, you desperately want people to see it. Next up is internal. Think of your employee cafeteria menu or daily operational memos. Then you step up to confidential data. This would be something like a draft of your Q3 earnings report. Finally, you hit the top tier, restricted data. This is the big stuff, like the actual proprietary source code for your brand new product. If that restricted data gets exposed, it could cause catastrophic, company-ending legal or competitive damage. And here is the major, absolutely crucial takeaway for this section. Classification connects business judgment directly to security action. Business leaders, not just the IT custodians, have to own these classifications. Why? Because it's the business unit leader who actually understands the true real-world consequence of a specific spreadsheet being leaked or destroyed. If you just toss this entirely over the fence to IT, they're going to do one of two things. They'll either try to build an impenetrable digital vault around every single thing, which will bankrupt the company, or they'll protect nothing, which entirely exposes the company. By actively taking ownership here, management ensures that defensive resources are spent wisely, protecting those restricted crown jewels. Let's shift gears to Chapter 3, the fraud and risk triangles. Here, we're going to unpack human and systemic threats. Because how do these classified assets actually get compromised out there in the real world? Well, we're going to examine two really powerful conceptual models to explain it. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it dives deep into human psychology. The fraud triangle explains why everyday, normal insiders sometimes misbehave. Imagine a trusted, long-time employee who suddenly faces overwhelming medical debt. That is the pressure. Next, they find an opportunity. Maybe they notice an open admin folder on the network or just some really weak internal accounting controls. Finally, rationalization kicks in. They start telling themselves, I'm just borrowing this money until my next paycheck, or the company owes me a bonus anyway. When those three elements converge, boom, an insider threat becomes a very harsh reality. Now, notice the deep connection here between human opportunity and systemic vulnerability. This is exactly where business management and cybersecurity perfectly intersect. Human misbehavior relies entirely on that opportunity corner of the fraud triangle we just talked about. And structurally, that opportunity is exactly what we call a systemic vulnerability in the cyber world. As a manager, you obviously can't easily control an employee's personal debts or their internal mental rationalizations, but you absolutely can govern and restrict their systemic opportunity by actively managing those network vulnerabilities. Which leads us perfectly to the risk triangle. So the crucial point to grasp here is that risk physically emerges at the exact intersection of these three elements. You have threats, those are the hackers, the malicious insiders, the hazards. You have vulnerabilities, the unpatched software or the super weak passwords. And you have exposure, the actual magnitude of harm to your business if things go south. Think about what happens if just one piece is missing. Say you have a deadly threat and massive exposure, but literally zero vulnerabilities because your software is perfectly patched up. Well, you have no risk. Alternatively, let's say you have a glaring vulnerability and a known threat, but it's on an empty test server with absolutely no sensitive data. Your exposure is zero, so your risk is practically negligible. It absolutely must be all three of these things combining to materialize into a painful business impact. Okay, moving to Chapter 4, treating cyber risks, focusing on managerial decisions. We understand how risk emerges now, but how does management actually practically deal with it on a day-to-day basis? Risk treatment is ultimately a portfolio of explicit choices. Let's look at a quick scenario for these 4 strategies. You might choose to mitigate a risk by installing a robust new firewall to proactively block incoming attacks. Or you might transfer a risk by purchasing a comprehensive cyber insurance policy to shift that financial burden far away from your own balance sheet. Now, if the risk of regulatory fines for some brand new, highly experimental app is incredibly high, you might just avoid the risk by killing the project entirely before it even launches. Or let's say a risk is super minor and fixing it would literally cost more than the potential damage itself. You deliberately choose to accept it. But remember, accepting a risk means making a formal, documented decision. It does not mean just turning a blind eye and hoping for the best. Because you really have to remember this fundamental truth. Zero risk is a total myth. Even with the absolute best, most expensive controls in place, residual risk always remains. Mature governance isn't about perfectly sanitizing your environment. That's impossible. It requires continuously monitoring, explicitly documenting, and formally accepting this remaining residual risk right there in the executive boardroom. Mature governance means the CEO and the board look at that remaining risk and formally say, we accept this. No one gets to plead ignorance when things go wrong. Finally, we reach Chapter 5, achieving cybersecurity maturity, and embedding this capability right into your organization's DNA. How does an organization actually prove its security works, instead of just, crossing their fingers and hoping they don't end up on the evening news? Let's move to and see how this builds across the capability maturity model, It is definitely a journey. You start all the way down at level 0, complete chaos, practically non-existent security. At level 1, responses are purely reactive and ad hoc. You're basically entirely relying on the heroic efforts of that one completely stressed out IT guy. Level 2 is repeatable, which is better, but it still relies way too heavily on tribal knowledge rather than actual documentation. By level 3, you finally have a defined, documented process that anyone on the team can follow. But the ultimate goal? That's levels 4 and 5. This is where security is fully managed, it's measured with hard data metrics, and it's dynamically optimized. At this stage, you aren't just reacting to fires anymore, you are proactively adapting to threats before they ever strike. And this brilliantly illustrates our ultimate takeaway for today. If you ignore everything we've talked about, if you fail to govern cybersecurity, if you don't classify your data, or if you just refuse to deliberately treat your risks, you haven't magically avoided making a decision. Unmanaged cyber risk is simply an implicit management decision. Actually, scratch that. It's not just a decision. It's a very dangerous, completely undocumented one. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to reflect on today. Take a hard look at your own team, your own processes, and your own data. Are you genuinely mature and secure by design? Or are you just getting lucky? Use the frameworks from this explainer to find out. Keep questioning your controls, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.